Hello, all. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you here for our sample class discussion that will be looking at George Washington's farewell address with one of the truly great instructors of the Graham School, Jennifer Lind. My name is Seth Green, and I see many friendly faces in this room. But for those who I don't know, I am the dean here at the Graham School. And I just wanted to welcome you, give you a little context on our school, especially for those that are new, and then give you context on the sample class you're about to engage. So the Graham School is one of the founding divisions of the University of Chicago. We are here for lifelong learners who want to ambitiously and deeply understand the world and lead examined lives of purpose. We have four main program areas. We have a basic program that includes a four-year Great Books program at its core. We have a leadership and society initiative for people that are accomplished and want to design really meaningful next chapters of purpose. We have travel study and partnerships and opportunities to go around the world and learn while you're there. And then we have open enrollment, and that is where you can really go deep into different areas that interest you. And we're very fortunate to have over 50 courses every quarter that allow you to follow your curiosity. And we are thrilled that after she graduated from the MLA, and I'll give a more full introduction momentarily, Jennifer Lind has joined as an instructor in open enrollment, and she has brought her deep expertise in international relations and brought it together with our longstanding commitment to deep textual analysis and to Socratic dialogue. And she's really built out this world of text-based international relations discovery. And it's a world that has thrived. She began with one class just a couple years ago, and I saw that the three sections she's now teaching just in winter quarter are nearly all full. So it's a testament to the incredible teaching that Jennifer leads and the real demand for this intersection of looking at text seriously in the context of the world. And so with that, let me formally introduce our speaker today, or facilitator, I should say. Jennifer Lind holds a master's degree from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in International Relations and U.S. Foreign Policy. She subsequently worked for the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, in Washington, D.C., former Yugoslavia, and several sub-Saharan African countries. She has recently completed her Master of Liberal Arts here at the University of Chicago, focusing on this topic of U.S. foreign policy and international relations course design. And we were very fortunate at the end of that to say, we really want you to put this into action. And she's done so with immense talent and a huge following. And so with that, let me turn it over to Jennifer. As I do so, I'll just mention a couple things. One is that this is aimed to genuinely be interactive. Our classes are capped at 18 and highly interactive. This is obviously a larger group. Let me still, though, encourage everyone who can to turn on your screen because it really benefits interactivity. And please know in our actual classrooms, screens are on. You're all on one screen, and we really do have that high level of dialogue because we believe that knowledge is co-constructed. And then let me also just say, as I turn it over, that one of the immense blessings of this approach that Jennifer has taken to international relations is that it has so much in common with other aspects of what we do. And so, George Washington's farewell address is a great example because it is about these big picture themes, and yet it has all of this rich international relations embedded in broader conversations about life and society. And so with that, Jennifer, let me remove my spotlight and I'm going to add yours and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Dean Green, for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and new folks too as well. So as Seth just said, this is indeed a sample class, a sample in the sense that it's an example of the type of classes we offer and the type of classes I teach, and a sample in the sense that it is short. We are just together here for 1 hour. Most of our classes are 2.5 to 3 hours. So I'm delighted to lead this close reading and discussion of George Washington's farewell address, really to offer an idea of the type of courses we offer and I teach here at the Graham School. My approach is indeed consistent with the ethos of the Graham School, which is focusing on the text. We will do not just slow reading, but slow rereading, as I like to say, with deep analysis. We'll focus first, the way we begin really is to do this slow reading, to consider what is the intention of the author? What is the author trying to say? We want to understand what the work is, what work the words make us do. And then we want to discuss it. We want to debate, we want to critique, yes, argue, listen, determine what it means to us and what legacy a piece like this from our founding era has, what relevance that has in our lives today. With all this, we do it, of course, in a spirit of joint inquiry, centered around our text. It's the one thing we all have in common. During our time together in the classroom at Gleacher and also on Zoom, it is the one thing that we are grounded together in. And while we lifelong learners do bring decades of life experience, both professional and personal, that enriches our discussions and our understanding of the text. So in my classrooms that I'm delighted and grateful to say are large and have rigorous discussions, we always try to balance that, bringing in our own personal experience while also focusing on the text. So my area is really my life passion, my area of teaching and pedagogy and research are really two closely related fields, both US foreign policy and international relations. And in this sense, as Dean Green said, I aim to bring the timely to the timeless, connecting the timeless to the timely. And that is why I've chosen George Washington's farewell address, this foundational document to the US, as the focus and the anchor of our class today. So I'll offer so the plan for today, I'll offer a very simple framework of this piece, and then we'll dive right into the text that we'll read together with selected passages that we can focus word by word on to try to understand what this text means. I would start by offering a simple framework and pointing out that when we think of George Washington, you know, we think of the man, the myth, the legend, the general on a white horse. He's the face on the dollar bill, the father of our country. We think of various portraits. He becomes a statue in our mind. It's almost hard to imagine him living, right? But if we take this kind of vanilla, surface level Wikipedia description of George Washington, of the presidency, of our history, of our foreign policy, we would not capture the essence of the era, of the man, of the presidency itself. We wouldn't capture the tensions, the controversies that define the era, define the foundation, the founding principles, the tensions within them of our founding era. And the same would be true with the farewell address. If we just did a quick surface level search, we would see the George Washington's farewell address is often described as doing two things. Number one, he's letting everyone know he's both resigning and retiring. And number two, he's offering warnings of the dangers he sees the nation faces. But that sort of surface level description would really miss all of the challenges, the fragility of the era, the essence of what he was trying to say in this 7,000 word letter he wrote to the people, to his fellow citizens. So with that sort of general framework, I wanted to dive right into the text, really because it's that easy, soft, sort of surface level description that just sets a framework before we really dive in. And anyone who's taken any of my classes would know we always start with the title. We could spend a half an hour on this simple title, but I thought I would ask first for a volunteer to read out loud the 5-word title to this piece we're reading today. So any volunteers to raise their hand? And let me see, I think I have it on. Let's see, I don't see everyone. I have it on, okay. Any volunteers to go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to read out loud the title. John, thank you, John Smetanka. Hi, John, nice to see you.
Mute. Good to see you again. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, if you'd like to read the title, thank you.
Title, President George Washington's Farewell Address, 1796, abridged.
Thank you. So that first word there we see, president. What does president mean? Why does it begin with the word president? Anyone else want to raise their hand? Let's see, another volunteer. Well, John, you just read. Do you want to elaborate? What does the word president mean? Why do we start with the word president?
Well, I think it distinguishes him from the titles of the era. We don't use king. We're not using what other titles? Emperor. We're not using dictator. So it's actually in my view, it's a new word that has been introduced, and I guess it stems from the origin of presiding, of looking over and taking care of an entity.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And wow, anyone who's familiar with the basic program would just connect right away with John. I guess the first point you made was what president is not, right? And then their second point, what it is. In the basic program, we learn about Aristotle and his love for antonyms, right? President is not a monarch, a king, a queen, a czar, a pope, an emperor. A president should not die in office and should be chosen. A president is an elected head of a republic, right? And to John's second point, a president is chosen to preside over an assembly. And any Latin scholars here might recognize the roots. President, comes before, and to sit, to preside. So just the word president gives us a strong clue of what George Washington's getting at here. So then we get his name, and then the word farewell. So what does farewell mean? It seems obvious, but George Washington wrote this with the care of a poet. He began writing it in the first year of his first term, 7 years before it was published. So farewell, what does farewell mean? It seems easy, but it's worth saying. I think I saw another hand. It says David, but I suspect it's someone else's name on your screen.
Well, I guess farewell would indicate that he is not intending to stay in office, that he would like to pass on what the responsibilities of that office are. So he's saying goodbye to the people so somebody new can come in.
Exactly. So goodbye to the people as someone else new can come in. New. So goodbye and new. Exactly. And he's wishing them well. He's leaving of his own accord. He's leaving happily. When you search back in his letters, more than half of them speak about Mount Vernon. He's eager to go. He not only does not want to run for a third term, he did not want to run for a second term. He did not want a first term, right? He never viewed the presidency as the capstone of his life career. He viewed it as an epilogue. He wishes them well. And as the song goes, he wants to teach them how to say goodbye. So he wishes them well, and their success depends on his leaving. Now we come to address. So address. So any thoughts about the word address? Questions or comments? What does the word address mean? Let's see, any other hands up? Anyone want to take a stab at it? I see familiar face. Peter Monahan, any thoughts on the word address? Hi, Peter, good to see you.
Nothing in particular other than it's intended as a speech to the citizens of the new country that he has just been leading. Other than that, I don't have any particular thoughts on it.
Well, citizens, thank you, exactly. Citizens, and again, the word new, right? This is a fragile young country that's been through a hard-fought war and a hard-fought victory. And so they're citizens, they're fellow citizens. So let's go next to the salutation. Any volunteers to read the 4-word salutation? Just looking for a hand up. It says David, but I suspect that's
Eileen, I need to change
Eileen.
that, sorry.
Eileen, thank you.
Yeah. Friends and fellow citizens.
Thank you. So friends. Friends and fellow citizens. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments? What is he getting at there? Why does he say friends and fellow citizens? Heather, good morning.
Hi, good morning. It's welcoming, it's inclusive, and it's kind of acknowledging that everyone is participating.
Great, right. So
Mhm.
it's inclusive, it's welcoming. Friends, it's almost like saying dear, right? Friends has a strong connotation. It's warm, welcoming, inclusive, and the word "and" is inclusive. John Britschker, I see your hand is up. Any thoughts or questions there?
I'm wondering if Friends and Fellow Citizens goes back to the address. In other words, even though he introduced himself as president, not like anyone would not know who George Washington was, but this is not an official proclamation of the government. This is, I'm a guy, you're a woman, whatever. We're all in this together. This is not, I'm not commanding you. I'm not really leading you. I'm just suggesting from one person to another.
Thank you. So suggesting from one person to another, not leading. So it's a sense that they're peers, fellow. So friends is warm and inclusive, and is very inclusive, entirely inclusive. Fellow meaning they're peers. He's speaking eyeball to eyeball with peers and citizens. We could talk all hour about the word citizens, right? Citizen is you have to be proactive. It's not resident. Citizen requires work. And fellow citizens means friends are people we know, right? Most of us, I don't know, we have 7 or 8 very close friends or a dozen friends and many, many acquaintances. So friends is a small group, but fellow citizens, that speaks to a union. That speaks to the country.
Mhm.
That speaks to the work that he's calling for that needs to be done. John, I see your hand is up again. John Smetanka.
Yeah, I would, when I first read this and then in reading the address, what struck me is that the word friends really set the emotional tone for the address. You were talking about our would you say views or how we view George Washington as some sort of static icon and so forth. When I got through the address, it was very emotional. It was colloquial. It was a concern that you would have for a friend. And I got a sense that he was, very heartfelt.
Okay.
It just wasn't some sort of public address, but he was speaking from the heart, I think. And so he was setting the emotional tone, I think, for
Thank you.
this.
So emotional and heartfelt. And indeed, we know that Madison wrote the first draft, and then Hamilton heavily wrote the rest, but George Washington, it's often said that Hamilton wrote the prose and George Washington turned it into poetry, that it was heartfelt and emotional. He wasn't just a statue, right? And he's concerned for the welfare and the well-being and the survival of these 13 fragile colonies, these disparate colonies strung out along the Atlantic seaboard that are barely hanging on together by a thread in a dangerous world at war. And these fellow citizens need to come together. And we'll see this throughout this, as John just said, heartfelt and emotional appeal. He says over and over again, he's begging and pleading with them to consider his warnings, his disinterested warnings, because he's no longer he never wanted to be a politician. So I see one more hand up and then we'll go to the first paragraph. Cynthia, hello.
Hey, thank you so much. I think the exciting thing about a class like this is that you go back and just what you're doing, making us break down word by word, something I'd never really paid attention before, but looking at that, friends and fellow citizens, it's reminiscent, I think, of what we might have expected in ancient Rome from Cicero. And his speeches were designed to get the fellow citizens to act or to respond to one of their needs, but mostly it was just something to inspire them to some form of action, I think. And it's possible, I would think that Washington and certainly others who were helping with this would have thought about those old Roman citizen speeches.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure there are Roman scholars with us here today who could speak more to that. But absolutely, right? And some phrase it as the humility hubris index, right? That George Washington seemed to strike right on tone. The founders were well aware of Rome and well aware, and we see these direct passages in the excerpts today of the fate of many nations, right? From Caesar to Napoleon to military leaders became tyrants, right? And how to avoid that fate. So absolutely the sense of history, when he says fellow citizens, he's speaking to people he doesn't know. They're all citizens. And these 13 colonies need to somehow form a union. It's often said that the founding fathers created a national government without a nation. And one easy way I like to think of that is like we think of Canada, we think of the Quebecois. They are a nation who has made peace with the state or country or nation state they live within, right? Canada. So a nation can live within a state. But here, George Washington and the founders have created a national government, but they don't yet have a nation. It's like they have a roof without a foundation or walls. And he needs, before he goes, he's begging these 13 colonies, these citizens, to come together as a union before the forces at overseas, bring about their disunion, because there's a lot going on in the world in this era, and a lot going on in the Western Hemisphere and the continent that these little 13 fragile colonies need to contend with. And if they're going to, these fellow citizens need to come together. So let's start with the first paragraph. I thought we would just start with the first 11 lines. Let's see, do we have the first 7 lines? Do we have a volunteer to read the first 7 lines of the first paragraph? Roberta, might you read? Thank you.
Happy to. The period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant, and the time actually arrived when your thoughts must be employed in designating the person who is to be clothed with that important trust, it appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce to a more distinct expression of the public voice, that I should now apprise you of the resolution I have formed to decline being considered among the number of those out of whom a choice is to be made.
Thank you. Let's stop there. Thank you. All right, those first lines, do any words pop right out at you there? Any words really pop out in those first 7 lines that Roberta just read slowly for us? We see the word citizen yet again. So twice he said the word citizen. That's important. Yes, somebody else had a hand up. Dale and then Cynthia.
Well, there's several things that one could point to, but one that I particularly chose was, it appears to be proper, especially as it may conduce to a more distinct impression. Or did I skip a line there?
No, that's great. So
Okay, more distinct impression of the public voice. And I think that through time and circumstances and history, maybe that's not so much today because of the changes our country has gone through. And I believe it was Washington, maybe Jefferson, I cannot recall, but maybe it was Adams, warned against the 2-party system because of a narrowing of viewpoints and the partisanship that could result.
Thank you. Absolutely. That brings up a very good point about the dangers that he saw of the era. George Washington considered partisanship and political parties as purely bad, negative. He did not see them as we might see them today as offering legitimate opposition. He saw them as a danger and a threat to the Union. And we'll see these 3 themes: regionalism, partisanship, and foreign entanglement and permanent alliances that he warns us against. So that's excellent to draw that. Exactly. The public voice, that the word public we see, and proper and trust. It's emotional, and he brings in morals and ideals, values here.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Does he not also state, or at least imply, nationalism as when he speaks of allies and what he sees as the proper relationship with allies? So I also would have added nationalism to your list, and I don't know if that's correct.
Well, there's no correct or incorrect, really. We're all just discussing and debating and coming to our own conclusions, really, what it means. But nationalism cuts to, you're absolutely on target. Nationalism cuts to the heart of this document. Fellow citizens, that's nationalism. That's saying what George Washington did not use the word nationalism. He used the phrase cement of interest. George Washington knew the country physically better than any of the founders. He was like James Bond, constantly being shot at, never hit. Throughout the French Indian Wars, he was all over. The Wild West was Ohio. He was in New England. He was in he was all over the country. When Lafayette said, come on, let's go visit Europe, he said, no, let's go to Ohio. I need to create a cement of interest for these little fragile colonies who have nothing in common. They don't like each other. They don't want to share a dime or a militiaman with each other. And they're never going to hold. They're surrounded by European colonies, and the European powers who won't stop fighting with each other, they're just waiting for us to fail so they can carve up the continent. So nationalism is that glue, which George Washington called the cement of interest, that fellow citizens gets right to. So nationalism, I see this throughout the whole document. Let's go to Cynthia. You've patiently had a hand up, and then let's get to the next paragraph. As you'll see, we could go a whole class. We could have 3 hours on one paragraph, but let's go to Cynthia, and then we'll go to paragraph 2. Cynthia,
Thank
then, of
you.
course, I see,
This is something that might be interpreted 2 different ways. Your thoughts must be employed. So he could be saying, you must be thinking about this because this is something of interest going on. Or he may actually be giving a directive. You must be thinking about this because it's a responsibility of a citizen to think about who's going to lead this country.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. He's beseeching them to think about how fragile they are and how unique and exceptional he considers them to be. This new fragile experiment. And you better get your act together and you become a union if you expect to succeed. Don't have a civil war. Stay together. Build up, be strong, stay out of the world's affairs. Later, you can decide if you need alliances and want to get involved in the world. But right now, you've got the oceans to protect you. So strengthen our union, build your economy. We didn't really have a military, right? Vicky, good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. 2 things. One, someone was saying, where was the thing against parties? It's in this address. It's just in the longer version. But the other thing that struck me was the description of what a president is, a citizen who's going to administer the executive government. It's really modest. It's really, it's a public service kind of a thing. It's not a grandiose, thing like we sometimes hear. And we were lucky, I think, to have such a modest, person for our first president.
Right. It's often said by historians that his character defined the role of a president. Well, let's look at, we could do all day on one paragraph. The second paragraph looks at regionalism and these are excerpts, of course. And the third looks at this partisanship. But first I see one more hand up. Greg, good morning. Did you have a comment or question? And then we will go to the second paragraph.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I just had a question kind of on the context of this, like reading it. Of course, he led it off saying that he was not going to be running for re-election. So that was like a major purpose. And was that widely known? Like, was there news in terms of what he was giving with this address? Because then the other question is, how would this have been distributed? Was he putting this out? You think of the relations of the media then and what it evolved to in terms of the presidency. But was this was something that was published? Was this going to be getting widely circulated? Was this talking mainly to the circle around and then it would just press from there. And as I'm saying, was he saying something that nobody had any idea that, oh, he's not going to run for re-election? You know, like we thought we were set for as long as he was going to be around Washington. I mean, he's before Mount Rushmore. He would be the guy who would be there, you know, that sort of thing. So
you kind of broke up. Your audio is a little fuzzy with the first part of what you said, but the second part, it was indeed not a speech. It was an article that he'd been drafting since his second year in office. So he'd been drafting it for 5 or 6 years with Hamilton, with mostly Madison, then Hamilton, you know, who he'd appreciated as, you know, it's often said Jefferson went to William and Mary, Adams went to Harvard, and Washington went to war, right? He was very aware that he wanted others to write for him or draft for him. It was published. It was never a speech. He published it in a nonpartisan paper in Philadelphia because he wanted it to be widely distributed. And he timed it for September 19th because the election essentially, and I see Clinton Stockwell's here, he could certainly give more details on early American history, but he wanted it to be just shortly before the election so that season would be short. So let's get to the second paragraph where we look at the warnings of reasonalism. Then the third paragraph will read a few lines on the warnings of partisanship. So the second paragraph, let's read the first 8 lines of the second paragraph where we get a warning about regionalism. And one thing I always do is I never read, and I always call on readers. Would anyone like to read out loud the first 11 lines of the second paragraph? I'm just looking for a hand. Clinton, would you like to, oh, here I see, Clinton, would you like to read for us? Oh, no. Okay. So Dale, I saw your hand is up. Dale, thank you. Just have to unmute. Whoops, Dale, you've got to unmute. Otherwise, we can call on somebody else.
I apologize.
Fine. Would you like to read the first 11 lines of the second paragraph? Thank you.
The unity of government, which constitutes you, one people, is also now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be foreseen. I'm sorry. God.
That's okay.
Much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth, as this is the point in your political fortress against which the batteries of truth, as this is the point in your political fortress against which the batteries, oops, sorry, man, I'm having trouble here. As this is the point, and let me see here, internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously directed. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness.
Thank you. We'll stop there. Thank you. So here we get the warnings about regionalism, the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness. So he's warning the unity of government is to be prized above all. Don't let your regional, your individual concerns and interests take priority over the national union. And furthermore, he's saying your survival depends on it, and your individual and collective happiness, your safety, your prosperity, your security, it's thanks to the strong national government. So it's this delicate balance, right? There's the fear of Napoleonism. We don't want a king. We don't want a dictator. We don't want an emperor. We don't want a pope. We don't want a czar, anyone there for life. And yet we need a strong government. The government provides your security and your prosperity. So don't be so don't focus on your state, your identity, your home, your citizenship isn't Massachusetts or South Carolina, it's the United States. And that's nationalism. And I see John Bretschker. Hi.
Yeah, as I'm going through this, a lot of this seems, I don't want to say obvious, but we understand this. This is what you'd kind of expect a good president to say to his people. And then I think back to the historical period where this is not just one guy giving up the reins of the republic, and just another republic. This is the republic. This is the one and only. And
Right.
so a lot of this, if you look back to England, which of course are all English citizens just shortly before, there's a king. Now, England, of course, has political parties and they bicker and they, go back and forth, but they do have a king. On the other end, they do have regionalism. They have Wales, they have, God forbid, they have Scotland, and they know that, there's problems there. So to me, this is not, I don't want to say mishmash in a bad sense, but this is partly, he's very concerned with the politics we've seen from England and, as you say, revolutionary France, but also things that are completely new. And, this is, on the one hand, this is a confederation of states.
Right.
And
Well,
that's not going
absolutely.
to last long.
And to highlight that, to us, it seems obvious. Sure, we're 50 states, right? Rally around the flag. Think of how it's even become personified in Uncle Sam. But at the time, there was nothing obvious about it.
Mhm.
People never thought democracy would succeed in a large country with 13 colonies, maybe a couple little Swiss cantons, but at best, it was settled wisdom, really, that democracy wouldn't succeed. It was revolutionary, the idea of stepping aside. And George Washington had a vision of these 13 colonies becoming a global power at a time when that was radical. No one else was putting that vision forward. And he had a vision of the United States. The United States, of course, then was a plural now. He had a vision of a nation. They built the national government. He wanted to build a nation. And he envisioned that nation state having a strong domestic and foreign policy in a very robust way. And they needed to stay together. And the next paragraph, they needed to stop all the partisanship. They needed to put union over party. It was a violent world out there. France and England couldn't stop fighting. Spain's in the mix. All the European powers they've got their gun sights set on the hemisphere, the Americas, and they're just waiting for these fragile colonies to fall apart. And now I forget who just said about the King of England, the fellow citizens, George Washington addresses his long letter, not a speech, he addresses it to, in their lifetime, they were citizens, of the British monarchy, right? So this is really wild and new. And he begs them over and over again to listen to his warnings. I wanted to highlight one line, but I see first one hand up, but then I wanted to highlight the 8th line down where he says, the fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will constantly be, with their gun sights on them. Those internal and external enemies I wanted to pause on. But first I see Bill Higgins, your hand is up. Good morning. Hello, Bill.
Good morning. I read this and with a little bit of suspicion. And then if you go, I'm going to jump ahead just slightly to the paragraph. It'd be the 4th one in the middle of it.
Do you mind if we just pin that and we'll just do one note here on this and then we'll pin that next? How about that?
Okay, I'm just suspicious of the nationalism and the threat of nationalism is to liberty that he talks about. And we can go into detail later, I guess.
Sure, well, let's do that. And first, let's just back up here to this 8th line in the 2nd paragraph. Any thoughts? So internal and external enemies, what does he mean about that? What are the internal and the external enemies? John, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. This struck me as a very important point. He was very prescient, wasn't he? This seems, this could be written today. But I think especially the lines, internal, external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously. I mean, if you're talking about misinformation and, being led astray, both by external enemies, I would assume he's talking about other countries having some sort of influence, and internal would be, he talks about geographical discriminations and so forth below, but individuals who may not agree with this confederation and would like to see it break apart.
And I'm glad you used the word confederation. Thomas Jefferson died believing that he lived in a confederation, right? So this was really, there's so much relevance, right, today, and these threats to the Union. Well,
Yeah.
internal and external, again, and somebody mentioned the era, the revolution, the Revolutionary War, the victory that George Washington led, right? That was the capstone of his life. It allowed the colonies to escape Europe's wars, but it also revealed how vulnerable the Union was, how vulnerable the colonies were, how in danger of dissolution the colonies were. Civil war was always sort of a danger. The colonies were weak compared to the European powers. Their greatest fear was that they'd become factious colonial dependencies. He was beseeching them to take seriously these warnings. I don't want to overlook Bill's comment, but first I see Clinton's hand. Let's look at just the first lines of the next paragraph, and then we'll get to Bill's comment in the fourth paragraph. But first, Clinton, I saw your hand up. Hello, Clinton. Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. I don't think the Constitution would have been written were it not for Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion scared them that they have to come up with something that will unify them. And I also think, and I may be wrong in this, that wasn't this very close to when the Whiskey Rebellion was occurring in the western part of the states. So the whole notion of factionalism, I think, was very worrisome for Washington.
Well, thank you for adding that. Exactly. The dangers were ever present, ever present. Well, let's skip over the third paragraph is really partisanship. And he's saying, don't put party over country. Well, let's skip that for the moment to go to Bill's comment. Bill, if you wanted to jump back in again on the fourth paragraph, is that where you had a comment?
Yes, and everything, Washington said so far has unity and understanding that he wanted to bring the nation together. But I'm glad at least he mentioned, if we go to the middle, it says the necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power by dividing and distributing it into different depositories and constituting each the guardian of the public weal against invasions by others. I thought that was interesting because that talks about, the one thing he doesn't talk enough about, I believe, and what the Constitution as it's written, addresses is limited federal government instead of overarching nationalism. And I think that's the threat. I mean, today, I think we've got overarching nationalism, and we've degraded parts of the Constitution, such as the 9th and 10th Amendment, by degrading the authority of the states and the local governments that the 10th and 9th Amendments clearly address. And so I think that there's a mistake in taking, there's a certain national interest, no doubt, national defense and that foreign policy, trade, that sort of thing. But I don't believe Hamilton was a real lover of, shall we say, the people's ability to govern themselves entirely. He wanted a strong national government. And it's clear in this document, he had a lot of influence over Washington.
Well, you bring up many good points there. And exactly. So at that time, we were small and fragile, right? Whereas now the comparisons with today are really worthwhile to think about. And it was sort of a dance for Washington's here, right? Not an overarching, they didn't want a king. They didn't want to suppress liberties. They didn't want to suppress freedoms. But they needed a strong government to hold together. And they needed a strong union if they were going to not just cement their own interests, as he said, because what did people in Ohio and South Carolina have in common? He needed to find a way to forge a nation. and yet not overreaching, as you say. We don't want, we still have these liberties, right? And the life, liberty, and pursuit of individual freedoms. So kind of cuts to the heart of this, that dance or that balance between individual liberty and social cohesion and the common good. And at this point, the country was it was like a toddler, right? It wasn't quite a newborn. We, after all, just defeated the British, not just the monarchy and this sort of buffoon like character of a king, but we defeated the British monarch, the British Empire. And yet we were sort of like a toddler, not a newborn anymore, but a toddler who could just fall any moment. And they were all, and the French, the British, Spain controlled the Floridas, right? They were not just constantly at war, but they were kind of they were poking at us, right? And also they were proactively hindering our westward movement. So it was sort of this dance, create a strong government, but also ensure liberties. Should we look at just a few sentences about the partisanship on the third paragraph? Again, these are excerpts. We could spend an entire quarter enjoying the pleasure of close reading of George Washington's farewell address. But let's just read. The third paragraph is short, so we could read the entire third paragraph. It begins with, in contemplating the causes. Any volunteers to read the third paragraph? It's a short one. I see Nancy. Hi, Nancy. Good to see you. Would you like to read the third paragraph? Thank you.
In contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, it occurs as matter of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations, northern and southern, Atlantic and western, whence designing men may endeavor to excite a belief that there is a real difference of social interests and views. One of the expedients of party to acquire influence within particular districts is to misrepresent the opinions and aims of other districts. You cannot shield yourselves too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which spring from these misrepresentations. They tend to render alien to each other those who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, do any words or phrases jump out at anyone? Any questions or comments about this section? The warning on partisanship, the sort of heartfelt, emotional warning. Greg, I see your hand is up. Hello again.
Hi, Jennifer. Yeah, I think, well, actually just what was happening right in front of Washington's eyes, basically this time. He could see in terms of, like, he was talking geographical. Adams was from Massachusetts. Jefferson was from Virginia. There was a fairly close election at the time. It wasn't like Adams won by acclamation. The way the election rules were set up, whoever came in second became the vice president. It wasn't like they ran on a ticket. So because Jefferson didn't quite get over the hump versus Adams, which he did get later on, thanks to the House of Representatives, and he got it. But so they ended up as people kind of on the opposite sides of a lot of the issues, and they were in the same administration as Adams was Washington's vice president, in the term. So I guess it was I don't know if it was widely known, but Jefferson was pretty much doing a lot to undermine Washington. Even he didn't have a great, So this is something that maybe Washington was speaking about in terms of what was going on, without directly implicating either one of them.
Sure, right. Who both had many historians think Jefferson wrote parts of this, although that's Joseph Ellis often says he believes Jefferson wrote long sections of this, but he can't prove it. But do we see it in the text in this third paragraph here, warning us about partisanship? Are there any words that jump out at you in this third section here to suggest, to speak to what John was just saying about partisanship? John, again, we have several Johns.
Which one do you want? What really struck me in that paragraph is what Lincoln was going to say a couple generations later. It's like, George Washington, you were right. And we're getting through that, and we're trying to, in the first inaugural, trying to avoid the war And then in the second inaugural, trying to fix what was broken.
Okay, so fix what was broken. So he can see, so he predicts. So Washington is saying, you need to put union party over, put country over party, or this union is going to break. That word fix. All right. So he talks of jealousies and heartburnings. This is, as I think Heather said earlier, it's emotional. He says we ought to be bound together by fraternal affection, fellow citizens. Find a way to put your common concerns, your social cohesion, your common good ahead of your individual local concerns. If you want to become free and prosperous, if you care about your freedom, your liberty, your prosperity, your safety, your security, the government, and it's not in the big little government 2024 sense of political debates today, it's in the sense that we need a strong nation. If you want to defeat your enemies, and they're right there knocking at the door, Spain's in Florida, the British, the French, we need to come together as a nation, just as we did in our hard-fought Revolutionary War. Vicky, I see your hand is up, and then let's move to our final sections on foreign policy on page 3. Vicky.
It's such a strong statement because he really believes in the unity of the people, I think. Because what he's saying is, if you feel like the other people are alien and they're different, he says that's misrepresentation. So he's really emphasizing that the part that connects is way stronger than the part that divides. It sounds like he believes it fully.
That's wonderful. So his belief in his friends and fellow citizens, he believes that what they share in common, the basis, the foundation for creating a nation, is true and sincere in his mind. And no one knows it better than George Washington, because he's been all over the place on his horse. He knows the country. He's fought for them. So he knows if anyone can speak about the character of the country and the possibility of the sincerity of the things that can unite them, it's really George Washington. So it's also touches on, we won't get into it, but it touches on that theme, some say myth, of American exceptionalism. George Washington believed in that. Let's look, only in the interest of time, let's move forward to page 3 on the foreign policy. That, after all, is the area I focus on in my teaching at the Graham School, in my life work and research. Let's just look at foreign policy, just in the interest of time, before we have to end our hour. On page 3, we get to foreign policy. Let's read the short 4 lines that begin with the great rule of conduct. Any volunteers to read that short mini paragraph, the great rule of conduct? Tim Murphy, is that a hand?
It certainly can be.
Thank you.
What am I reading for us?
The great rule of conduct. Marina will put it on the screen.
Yep, thank you. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is, in extending our commercial relations, to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far, as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith.
We might as well read the next paragraph too, if you don't mind. Thanks, Tim.
Sure. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance. When we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we may at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected. When belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions upon us, will not lightly hazard the giving us provocation. When we may choose peace or war, as our interests guided by justice shall counsel.
Thank you. So those 2 sections that Tim just read for us. Any comments or questions, or does any sort of specific word or phrase stick out with any of you all? I know I confess the song from the Broadway show is in my mind when I read this section. John, I see your hand is up. Hello again.
Again, I'm getting back to Abraham Lincoln, when obviously in 1812, we fought the British pretty much to a draw. It was dangerous, but we did. but by the American Civil War, you realize England is just north of us, Spain is just south of us. But we've got these oceans in between. And by the American Civil War, our Navy is bigger than Britain's. And Lincoln has to decide with the controversy over the taking of the ambassadors, the Southern ambassadors, whether to go to war with England at that point. And he decides not to. So I read that what George Washington is saying, eventually we'll be strong enough, we can decide whether to go to war or not. And it's not going to be forced on us. I think he's exactly right.
Well, thank you. And it's nice to see, because we do, if we had another hour, we would look at how this plays out in the next 2 centuries, right? And how it comes in and out of favor in the Civil War and the 2 world wars. But here, exactly. And the next sentence, he says, why forego the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? So George Washington is saying to his friends and fellow citizens, we just won this hard-fought Revolutionary War. We defeated the British Empire, yet we're fragile. We're barely hanging on together by a thread. And it's a nasty, violent world out there, and they're right here in our hemisphere, on our continent. And let's take advantage of these oceans and stay out of those wars. We can be friendly and we can have commerce with everybody, but we are not signing any treaties, no permanent alliances. We talk about how he foresaw the need for he foresaw global power. He also foresaw a need for a sphere of influence. The Monroe Doctrine comes in 1823, which was really a British idea. We didn't quite yet have the Navy we needed to say to the world, the Western Hemisphere is ours. So we quickly made friends with Britain after the War of 1812 and said, hey, let's work together to keep the other Europeans out of our hemisphere. We'll take your Navy, thank you. But by the way, it's our Monroe Doctrine. It's not a UK thing anymore, a British thing anymore. So George Washington foresaw this. And he said, look, neutrality, otherwise we're doomed. Once if you have an alliance with one, if you ally with France or Spain or England, you're just going to get the others come to set their gun sights on you. And this fragile country needed its space to grow. As John just said, we didn't yet have an army or navy. We were broke, we were tired, we were tiny little colonies, and we wanted to grow. And George Washington, when he thought grow, he was looking west. He meant grow through demographics. And I've often thought demographics, population growth, and immigration, it's not, in my mind, we don't give it enough focus in international relations. That's a key ingredient to the US growth, immigration that comes through. And of course, a very strong criticism of Washington too is he's silent on the issues of slavery and Native American genocide, which fueled the US growth as well, which is a whole other topic that we don't have time to get into. But this sense of neutrality, that was the cornerstone of his foreign policy. Let's end with the very last paragraph on page 3. Anybody would like to read the last paragraph on page 3? And I see Marina, so our time is almost up. Well, I'll just read the last sentence. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the world. So we are just about time. I wanted to highlight one thing in the very last. So these are excerpts that we've put together, but on page 4, it's the actual ending of the final 7,000-page letter, not a speech, that George Washington had published in a nonpartisan Philadelphia paper. He ends by beseeching them really to consider his warnings, and he talks about our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. And he uses the word danger in his opening paragraph. He bookends, he frames his farewell address to the friends and fellow citizens with the word danger and dangers. So that's something to consider that I leave you with when you consider the relevance and the legacy of George Washington's farewell address. I might turn it over to Marina. I know we're at time, but I don't mind going a few minutes extra if anyone would like, but I'll turn it over to Marina.
Yes, Jennifer, thank you so much for the class. And as we wrap up, I wanted to ask a question. You know, there's so many of us in the class and we had a wonderful engagement, lots of questions. And I wanted to ask you that you share what your approach in the classroom is, recognizing that this is not a standard classroom, is perhaps much bigger than what we typically have and curate. And so your approach, as well as, can you share a little bit about your upcoming courses and perhaps about a course that you're specifically looking forward to? Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. And thank you, everyone. This is much larger than a typical class. We try to cap at 18 or 19 students. So we all have a chance to share and talk together. So I do less talking. But indeed, you know, if I had to describe my pedagogical approach, my methodological approach, I would say it's to really go 20,000 feet up and really consider the big essential questions, both of foreign policy and also, you know, it sounds like a basic program sort of blurb, but it's really what it means to be an individual and live within society, right? George Washington here, he's talking to individuals and what it means to be an individual and live within society and balance those tensions and balance those controversies, both in domestic and foreign policy. And I think we can answer those big questions when we really go 30,000 feet up by diving deep into passages. You know, I thought carefully, should we just look at one passage? But it's just such a rich document. I wanted to try to look at several passages. But I really believe, you know, whether you're reading the Iliad or a Toni Morrison novel or a Graham Greene novel, Washington's a founding document, diving deep with slow rereading and in small, short passages is really the way we can answer big, essential questions. That's something I aim to do in my classes. My class coming up this winter, I'm teaching the book by T.E. Lawrence, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. There are 2 Zoom sections and 1 in-person section. The in-person section is Thursdays at Gleacher. And many know that novel by its film adaptation, Lawrence of Arabia, which is essentially about the Arab Revolt. I aim, and I recently taught a class on the US war in Vietnam, using 2 novels, Graham Greene's novel, The Quiet American, and the response novel, The Ugly American. And in that class, my aim was to focus on the 2 novels rather than the actual historical events, which we can all search on our own, right? I don't teach military history classes. Yet this winter, we really are going to have a constant combination of the book, the memoir that Lawrence wrote about his time in the Arab Revolt, and the actual life events, because Lawrence's book is Lawrence's story. It's not it's not a factual textbook, right? It's Lawrence's wrapping of that experience. So that's coming up in the winter. And my spring class, again, I'm using fiction to teach international relations, and I'm teaching Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness paired with Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. That's coming up in the pipeline. Thank you. I forget if you asked me another question, Marina, but that's on my mind for now.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the class, and thank you for sharing what's coming.
You're welcome.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you everyone for joining. We are learning alongside each other. I see one more hand up. Dale, if we'd like to give you the last question.
Perhaps I'm misreading this, but when I've read the book that this came out of a couple of years ago when it when it resurfaced.
Which book?
And I think that the overall impression I got, and somebody else mentioned it, was prescient. And it reminded me a bit of Tocqueville, but it really reminded me of Orwell. Particularly in the present climate, which I don't want to get into, but I find it amazing that we occasionally have thinkers, philosophers, writers who have this ability to look into the future and be so prescient about what is coming.
Well, thank you. And exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned Tocqueville, because of course, that was 1831 when he wrote his about his impressions after visiting America. I think he was 2 years in the US, I'm not sure. But he wrote something that always jumps out at me in Tocqueville's book is he wrote about the steadfastness of George Washington, of his ability to remain neutral. And he also said he believes no one other than George Washington could have done that, to his steadfast commitment to neutrality. and credited George Washington. He's truly the father, he's the father of our country. And by stepping aside, he understood, he believed it was essential that he did not die in office. He understood the importance of elections. And he understood every decision he made was setting a precedent for this new fragile young country of ours. Well, on that note, we could talk forever, but on that note, we should say goodbye. And I look forward to hearing from any of you. My email's out there. You can reach me, and Marina will share this recording. I'm grateful for all of your interest, and thank you everyone for joining. And thank you, Marina.
Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us, everyone.
Thank you.